Okay, John, it's great to get back together with you here. We did an interview for Exploring Forward Thinking Workplaces a couple of years ago, and your interview was one of the interviews that was selected by A-Press for in my book, The Future of the Workplace. And the title of your interview was How to Lead More Holistically by Learning the Secrets of the Aspens. And recently, maybe you're aware of this, I've moved the interviews over to a new blogging platform. I wanted to give the interviews more visibility and make it easier for people to find them. So I switched from WordPress to the Ghost platform, which I really like. And while going through that process, I didn't migrate all the interviews in mass. I'm doing them individually and giving them some attention and a review. And I've been taking the time to reach out to people and let people know if they want to make any changes or what they think of it. And in a couple of cases, people have gotten back to me and said, "Oh, thank you for doing this, but I really wouldn't answer those questions the same way today. So much has changed." So I thought we'd lead off our interview with you here today, on this podcast. Rather than going back and talking about the interview we did with you, we thought we'd start with what's changed for you, what's new since that interview we did.
Yeah, thank you so much, Bill. I really appreciate the opportunity to catch up and talk about that, as well as just I'm grateful for all the good work and thoughts that you put out in the world as well. Yeah, some of the things I guess maybe that's changed for me has been really, as most people do, right? It's kind of building on your work, I guess, or using your curiosity to kind of explore new avenues. And for me, that has come in a couple of forms. One is I'm in the process of completing my doctorate in interdisciplinary leadership right now. So I'm in the dissertation proposal phase, and hopefully we'll be wrapping that up soon and doing the research over the summer and working towards completing my dissertation by the end of the calendar year or first part of next year. And that has taken me really to explore, kind of build on some of the work I've done around looking at corporate activism and the rising of employee voices within the workplace and the call for business leaders to take a more active stance in a lot of social and environmental issues, which we've continued to kind of intensify over the last few years and even the last few months. And building on that, really looking at more of social enterprise leaders, because in my view, they're kind of the next evolution of capitalism and capitalist leaders, because they're embedding profit and purpose, within their organizations and looking at how different stakeholders can not only help them grow their business, but be a part of it as well. So in my kind of research work, I'm focusing on that and the role of moral courage, and how that may be a practice that needs to be developed when these leaders are trying to resolve those tensions of profit and purpose, or business and society, or even stability and change. So that's been a new direction for me. And then kind of relatedly, here in Santa Fe, New Mexico, I started right at the beginning of the pandemic, so we had to pivot, but work trying to support social entrepreneurs here in our state. And so we launched an accelerator and ideation program for social entrepreneurs to try to put a spark into some of the entrepreneurial work here and really grow and build that next generation of entrepreneurs who really do want to mix profit and purpose together and embed that as part of their startup and part of their business. So those are really, probably the two bigger changes, I guess, that I've been working on over the last several years anyway.
So, John, this is Gwen. I'm just curious. Some of the themes that you're talking about, the advocacy and the social entrepreneurship, what's important about this type of work to you personally?
Yeah, that's a good question. Because a couple of things, I guess. So my career is kind of a mix of some of these challenges, if you will. So my first part of my career, first chapter of my career, I actually worked in politics and government in Washington, D.C. And so for the first 8 years, I kind of got a taste of the political side of our issues and developing policies and working with constituents and those types of things. And then the next chapter was business, but it was more kind of standard business, if you will. In many ways, it was kind of, even though, we had some innovative workplaces that I was involved in, we were probably more traditional businesses where it was focused on revenue growth and shareholder value, and a little bit on some of the stakeholder value, but not as much as social entrepreneurs do today. But, the real answer probably, kind of comes back to how I grew up, which was on a farm in South Dakota. And in many ways, farmers kind of represent a lot of those values, at least back in those days they did, where it was community centric and it was caring for the land, not for just themselves, but for future generations. And it was looking at what the possibility is and how we can help others, either our neighbors or even beyond our borders. And so a lot of those lessons from my farming, being a farmer's son, I think really even more so maybe later in my life is kind of influencing a lot of my work as well.
So what do farmers know that business people don't?
Well, I think they realize that it's not an infinite resource, that if you don't take care of not just the land, but your community and your family, that your legacy is really built around that. And so I think it's really those values of understanding the role that we play today to try to make things better for the future, whether we're not going to be here forever. So, kind of beyond ourselves. It's really that kind of that sense of betterment and doing things for the future, not just for the present.
Mm. And how has the last year or so of going through the pandemic sharpened those themes and what you've seen in other people?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it's a mix. There's definitely, we've seen a lot of good work where people have, pitched in to help each other, in ways, whether it's our immediate neighbors that couldn't get out because of underlying health conditions or other issues, or it's trying to, figure out how to navigate and keep initiatives going, just like we did with Santa Fe Innovates, as far as how do we pivot, and if we do, really more now than ever, we need to support entrepreneurs and startups that want to balance profit and purpose. Plus, we need that spark in our recovery as well. So, we decided to move ahead and pursue that. But still, we have, disappointingly, a lot of things that are holding us back. We're having people that are more focused on being selfish or maintaining power versus focusing on how do we create a better society in a thoughtful and meaningful way. And, that doesn't seem like those forces are going to go away anytime soon. And so that just puts more of a challenge on the people that do have a sense of morality and how they can use their platform to kind of rise above some of the selfishness and self-power that some are trying to pursue.
Have you ever seen an example of where somebody maybe started out with that selfish perspective and then something happened and it changed for them?
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, I think we're seeing some of that both in the business and the political side of things, right? So, there's some business leaders that, probably wouldn't have stepped up on some of these issues, especially after the insurrection in January, and that happened here on January 6th. But, they raised their voices in terms of knowing how bad that is for our system of government, and stopping political contributions to some of the elected officials that voted essentially to not validate a fair and safe election. So we're seeing, some business leaders kind of step up into that arena. And we obviously saw some political leaders do the same, that were in the party that was trying to, as it's called, the big lie, kind of support that election wasn't fair and secure, which obviously it was. But there's some in that same party that are trying to work toward, it's not about an individual, it's about ideas, and we need to move on and preserve, the institutions that have served us so well over the last, couple hundred years.
So, Bill, when you think back on Jon's interview that you did a couple of years ago, what what comes to mind as far as the Aspen aspect of it? If I could say that, the Aspen aspect. Because, Jon, when I read your interview, that's one of the things that was so fascinating for me was that personal connection, that story, and just how, we try to imagine what nature can teach us. And I know that was a book that you wrote a while back, but as you've listened to Jon talk about where he is now, Bill, compared to where you experienced him back then, what's changed when you listen to him?
Yeah, I think what has changed and what I'm finding interesting is how Jon has plugged into nature, where he grew up and how people lived there and what he experienced with the Aspens and how that's kind of giving him a foundation on how to live and work in the world as it changes. And I guess the question that's kind of coming up for me as I listened to Jon was, back when we did the interview, my opening question was, how can we create workplaces where every voice matters, everyone thrives and finds meaning, and change and innovation happen naturally? And when the pandemic happened, I stopped doing these interviews. It just did not seem like the right question anymore. And I'm still asking myself, is that the right question? And I've only probably done 2 interviews since in the past year, and it still doesn't feel quite right for me. So I'd be interested in Jon's opinion on that opening question and whether that's the right question we might be asking ourselves today.
And maybe we should ask him to just kind of quick do a thumbnail of what the Aspen story is, because we've had the luxury of reading that interview, and some of us may have read Jon's book, but not everyone has. So, Jon, maybe just start by telling us a little bit about that story and what was important about that for you.
Yeah, so Aspens are just a wonderful example in so many ways, and I kind of just stumbled upon it. I'm not a skier, and we wanted our sons to have that experience. So while they were skiing, I went snowshoeing, and the guide on that tour started talking about the Aspens, and it just really piqued my curiosity and caused me to do a lot more research on Aspens. And they're an amazing, really organism. I mean, their root system can literally, is every aspen is connected underground through their root system, and they are just a really connected community, and they help each other by the way they feed each other or nourish each other through the root system. And even aspens, if there's a challenge where they go, they die, the roots still maintain life, and after it could be up to 100 years, if I remember correctly, they can spring to life again, and all of a sudden you've got new growth. So there's kind of a sense of patience and when's the right time to kind of spring up. But then they also, serve kind of outside of their own ecosystem. The bark can serve as a sunscreen or a salve for animals, and the way they take in sunlight, the way their leaves are designed is just allows them to grow in places that other trees may not be able to. So there's just really, I guess what really kind of I took away, kind of from the lessons of the Aspens is really that sense of community, that sense of nourishing each other, the sense of helping each other outside of your own community. And I think those are relevant examples, today, probably more so than, it's relevant regardless, but I think we need to kind of return. I think nature can teach us a lot of things, and I think we need to listen a little bit more closely to some of those lessons from nature.
Yeah, Jon, Bill, again, I asked you a couple questions there, and I probably asked too many at one time, but I'm really curious about if you had an opinion on the question that we used in the interview, and if the changes in the world over the past year have changed that focus. Is it capturing what we need to be thinking and working towards?
Yeah, I think it does. I think the element that I would add new into that is that business leaders need more moral courage to kind of stay the path. I mean, what we saw last week with Basecamp is an example where the 2 founders said no more societal or political conversations are allowed within our company. To me, that's just very short-sighted and lacks moral courage to allow team members to talk about what's happening in the world And it's not, it's not to hurt productivity or those types of things. There's definitely channels available today, to have those conversations, whether it's during lunch hours or after work hours or, through Slack channels or other types of kind of online forums that employees or team members would have access to. I think you can't take what's happening in the world out of someone's life. I mean, it's impossible. And I think it just makes it such a constrictive workplace and a prescriptive type leadership model that is not healthy for anyone, including the leaders, whether they realize it or not. And so I think the element, maybe that the Aspens don't necessarily exhibit or exemplify, is really the role of that moral courage to expand outside your community, to engage in the issues that are uncomfortable, but still impacting people's lives. It's not that a company needs to be a social agency, but we spend over a third of our lifetime in the workplace. And so it needs to be a thoughtful place. It needs to be a place that understands the role of different stakeholders can play in our community, good and bad. And when in unfortunate issues or circumstances come up, ignoring them is not going to make them go away in someone's individual life or in the workplace. So we need to have the courage to be able to talk about some of the impacts that are happening in society and what it means for us as an organization and us as an organizational culture.
Yeah, I think that's a great discussion on that topic, John. I know that surprised and has gotten a lot of people talking about it. I think I just saw on the internet this morning that they believe 30% of the employees have already turned in their resignation.
Yeah, I mean, I guess kudos to the employees or the team members to, it's tough, right? Up to this point, I mean, Basecamp had kind of been an example, I think, of with a lot of software and tech companies of, they were doing, they put themselves out there as far as how they worked and how growth isn't everything. And it's just very curious to me why they've made this big change, this shift here. And it's unfortunate for them, and it's unfortunate for the people that have worked there and now that have to find a different place that meets more of their personal values as well as what they would like to see from a company. I think people, we've always had, it's interesting. I mean, because the other, as I've been doing a lot more research, I mean, there's a few people that, especially on the economist side, focus on Adam Smith and the Wealth of Nations and kind of ignore his early writings and book around the moral sentiments. And it seems like in Basecamp's case, as an example, I guess they're kind of ignoring the moral sentiment side of it now and going back to the shareholder side of focus of their business, which is unfortunate. But we need to, Adam Smith had talked about how when we make business decisions, we need to consider the broader society. We need to use this concept of the impartial spectator to put ourselves in someone else's shoes and understand how a decision may or may not affect them. And it's not just them personally, but the circumstances kind of surrounding that person that would be impacted by that decision. And we need to get back to that. I mean, we just seem to have lost, today, in Adam Smith's day, it was called sympathy, and today it's empathy. But it's empathy with courage that is what we need to be able to, really understand the impact of our decisions on others and try to make the decisions that produce the best possible positive impact on as many people as possible. We're not going to please everyone, but how can we have the best positive impact versus just a negative impact on the majority and a positive on a select few? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it certainly does, John. I guess the question that's coming up for me is, how do we help people make that journey, make that switch? It seems to be a growing trend, and I hope it continues. But how can we help that along?
Yeah, that's a challenging question. I mean, I think it's, in my view, part of it starts in business schools. And many business schools are making shifts to embrace more of the stakeholder capitalism kind of tenets and what that means for business leaders going through their programs and knowing, they're going to have an impact as they graduate and move into, bigger and broader careers. The business schools definitely, play a key role in that. And then, beyond that, I think it's voices that that go deeper, just like you do, around the challenges of what leaders need to do or think about and act upon. To me, I know there's been several books written about the leadership industry and how it's become superficial, or I think one of the books actually had, leadership BS, or was part of it was written by, I think that one was written by a Stanford professor. We just have gotten too superficial in leadership circles, in my opinion, too. And so I think a lot of the leadership thought leaders, if that's the right term, need to step up too. They need to deliver deeper content and deeper thoughts about the changes that need to happen or are underway, and how leaders need to adapt and build upon their leadership practices in better ways. And so I think it's a challenge for the business schools. It's a challenge for the leadership thought leaders. It's a challenge for current CEOs and how they need to communicate together. And we see some of that happening where Apple and Dell and other tech companies, Salesforce, are trying to prevent voter restrictions. But we need more of those conversations and more of those collaborative actions between business leaders to hopefully guide the political leaders to make decisions for the greater good rather than just to keep power.
So I apologize. I got really quiet there for a while because the lawn care people decided to show up just as we started doing the interview. And I was looking out the window saying, how long do they have to leave for? Really? There's grass all of a sudden that needs to be cut. So I apologize because, again, it was just really frustrating, but they're gone now. So this is the life that we lead now in the pandemic, right? It's trying to be concentrating while the world is like spinning around us. So
I just thought I was confusing you all.
Yeah, I was like, there was silence, and I was thinking to myself, oh, they're going to wonder if I died or what. So I apologize again for all that. But those of you who are listening understand this is the new world that we live in.
Yeah.
But John, I wanted to ask you a little bit about words and language, because specifically when you use words like moral courage, that has a whole lot of baggage that goes with it, the whole concept of morality. What do you do when people don't understand what that even means? I mean, how do you express that? You talked a little bit about your perspective of it, but just the use of those words in a business conversation, what happens?
Yeah, that's a good question. Because unfortunately, I think morality has kind of been hijacked by more self-indulgent leaders, and even political leaders, business leaders, and even religious leaders, and it's kind of lost its meaning, unfortunately. So I think we need to go back and talk about what morality really is, and it is about trust. It's about the freedom to do what we ought to be doing. It's about an ethic of care. It's about justice and responsibility and common good. And it's not about self-righteousness or some religious fervor around it. And, to me, it really relates back to, community and social capital. We've a great book, Upswing by Robert Putnam, talking about, how we've moved from how we're currently kind of in an I state of community, and we need to return back to a we state. And, morality, it plays a role in that because it is about the greater good, which means how do we come together as a community? So it's building social capital, but more importantly, it's building some social cohesion about doing the right things for as many people as possible. And so I think, from a business perspective, I mean, what business leader wouldn't want to do that, right? Or should want to, right? It's not about self-interest. It's about how can they do the best possible for as many stakeholders as possible. And stakeholders include not only the team members that work there, but it's the shareholders, it's the customers, it's the community, it's their partners in their business. And so it's keeping that broader perspective of, no business venture is a solo venture. And so morality plays a role, and it's just the topics that the keywords I guess that I mentioned as part of that. Business leaders should want that within their workplace as much as political leaders should want it within our society.
Yeah, I admire you for having the courage to use words like that, because again, I think something that you and I have in common is that looking at that continuum of I and we, right? It is a continuum. There's lots of space along that continuum. And part of my struggle is trying to figure out how do we square that individual ruggedness that is, so much a part of our culture here in the United States with the reality that that sense of community and that holistic, we're a product of our society, but at the same time, everything that happens has an impact, right? It's all connected. Mm-hmm. So where are we on that spectrum? And how do we help people recognize that, that entrepreneurial spirit, that rugged individualism is an important essence, but not at the expense of the we. And I think that's why, trying to figure out how do you pull people toward that realization if that's not where they start? If your frame for thinking about things is that rugged individualism, what is it that pulls you toward that understanding that community is relevant and it is an important piece?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I'll start with the individual ruggedness, the kind of the Western mentality, if you will, of the, back in our, earlier history and so on. And I think people have kind of mythicized, or I don't know if that's a word or not, but they've kind of have a perspective on that that's not reality, in my opinion. I mean, you look back to Theodore Roosevelt as an example. So when both his wife and his mother died on the same day, and Theodore Roosevelt is kind of viewed as that individual ruggedness of a leader. So he moved to North Dakota, and started a ranch. And it wasn't him alone doing that. It was working with the community, learning from them. It was engaging in more than himself to not recover from the loss that he had, but to try to, regain his bearing. And it was relying on the people and the land and the different elements to kind of regain that. I mean, in my opinion, it's no different. People, think about, some of the nature sports as being about the individual, but when you're out on the trail, it's not about you. I mean, if you're really paying attention, you're there among so much. I mean, whether it's birds or trees or just the spirit of the land, it's not about an individual. It's about an ecosystem. And I think, so I think we just get the whole idea of individual ruggedism wrong. We are individuals, yes. And if we want to be rugged, then it should be in how we pursue our curiosity to understand how things are so interconnected. That's where we should spend our individual time, is trying to understand that. I think as far as the shift from back to we from kind of our current I state, yeah, I think it is happening. I am hopeful. I mean, I think going back to kind of the Aspens and some of my earlier work around the generations, I believe that millennials and Gen Z are much more connected and want to pursue things that are more than just profit, but there is a sense of good, a sense of common good. And so I'm very hopeful that with that generational change, I think we still need to, we have some years to go, I guess, for that to really kind of take hold. But I'm really encouraged by kind of that new mindset. And I think as some of the older generations, get out of power, if you will, and the newer generations start to take on those roles, then I think we'll start to see more of that change stick. It's interesting, not to get off on a tangent or anything, but, it's like in politics, right? And to run for president, there's a minimum age of being 35. Maybe we need to have a maximum age now too, so that we give younger generations a chance to begin to transition into these leadership roles and bring a more positive impact to the generational shifts that are happening. And maybe some of the older generations are more reluctant to embrace those, while the younger generations see the good in them and want to see more people come together towards doing things a little bit differently and toward a better society.
Well, those are some courageous thoughts and very optimistic. So I'm going to put my faith that you see things that are possible, and from that perspective, let's try to figure out what we can do to support that and those voices from a learning standpoint as well as just from a leadership standpoint. Because I think that's how we all grow, right? Is the opportunity to learn and grow as we do things. And even if there are still people who are in senior positions within the organization for whatever reason, providing chances for people to learn and grow from wherever they are, I think is one way we can all support positive change.
Yeah, and it should be more cross-generational, as far as listening across the generations to learn from each other. Obviously, older generations hopefully would have some wisdom based on the experiences that they have had through the years. So sharing those with the younger generations is essential, and vice versa. I mean, older generations need to be open to understanding the new perspectives that are emerging, based on millennials and Gen Z and their experiences. I mean, they had very different experiences, growing up and today than I did when I was their age. And so, but I learn from them all the time. I mean, in our cohorts, in our social entrepreneur program, we have definitely a generational mix of younger and older in that. And I think everyone learns from each other. And, I don't know what the magic formula is other than just doing it. But I think it is, we need to think deeper. We need to read deeper. We need to understand the ripple effect of our actions, not just on the current workplaces and in our communities, but the ripple effect that it has on the future. We just have gotten so focused on the present that we've lost sight of this sense of leaving the place better than we found it. And we need to recapture that not only in our workplaces, but in our communities. And it's disappointing to me that I don't know how we lost that sense. Again, in my childhood years and teen years and so on, there definitely was that sense among farmers and other leaders that they wanted to leave the place better than they found it. And right now we just seem to be stuck in, we want to keep the present for a few and ignore the future. And that's not healthy for anyone.
Jon, apologize for, we were wanting to see where this goes, and wanting to see where something goes means there's no hard plan. So thanks for your patience while we figure out.
No, I appreciate that, actually. I think that's the conversations are all about, right?
Well, and what's interesting to me is you really lit up here in the last part, and I started to feel some of your passion for talking about the land and we and some of those themes. So I appreciate your openness and willingness to share, because, we start off in this business mentality, right? We have this mindset that this is how we talk business, and we get stuck here. And the things that cause that to be so important for us are why sometimes we forget that that's the most influential and inspirational piece for a lot of people. So thanks for sharing that, because I think that's really what we're looking for, right? Is that authenticity and that essence of, why does any of this matter?
Right. In the silence, I guess I'm wondering either I've overstepped or confused, or I mean, I think I guess maybe from when we first did the interview, Bill, a couple of years ago, I don't think I'm coming across strident. I don't think you can tell me that, I guess, but. I think just over the last couple of years, it's just become, to me anyway, just so much more important that we need to get back to some original definitions of terms like morality and really understand what that means. Mm-hmm. But more importantly, and it's not about looking to the past, but, we do need to recapture this value that we used to have of leaving the place better than we found it. Yeah. And it's just frustrating to me that so many, in particular, business and political leaders, I mean, it's like Basecamp. I mean, just their current action, they're taking a huge step backwards, and I'm not understanding why. And we see that with a lot of political leaders. And to me, it's more about keeping power rather than leaving our place better than they found it. And so, we as citizens obviously have a responsibility. We need to vote. In Basecamp's case, the team members there are voting by looking for other jobs and leaving the company. We as individuals have power to try to, make this change happen. And it takes added effort, but, getting the right leaders in place is more important than most things to really get from the I to the we, and getting our bearings back on what's important in our communities and in our workplaces and in our lives.
So do you think the notion of what leadership is changing as well?
Yeah, I mean, I struggle with that a little bit. I mean, to some degree, it's getting back to what Adam Smith talked about in the moral sentiments, right? But at the same time, obviously, there's been a lot of changes, technology and otherwise, and we need to understand the importance of policy discussions to move things forward while keeping some of our morality or our social cohesion in doing that. So there's more leadership challenges to be able to do that. And that's why, I'm not overly critical well, maybe I am on some of the leadership authors and thought leaders out there, is that I think they've kept superficial for the most part. And there needs to be deeper thoughts than what's being explored today. And there needs to be more challenges to move leaders, business and otherwise, to better ways to think about things, not only narrowly about a certain area, but broadly about the impact on others within their stakeholder community.
I guess any final closing thoughts, Gwen or John, or, where are you in this conversation?
I'm not sure. I mean, for me, I think to me, I think the challenge for leaders, business and political, is to think about some of the virtues and moral terms that have served as a foundation for many years ago, and returning to what the original definitions of some of those ideals are, and then really challenging themselves to how they can put them into play to create better workplaces, better society, better community, better individuals, to do more for the common good rather than just for maintaining back, rather than trying to lift up as many of the stakeholders as possible that we can, by making good decisions to make a profit. We need that in businesses, but also pursuing a reasonable purpose that does serve a common good beyond just a financial reward.
Yeah, well said, John. I totally agree. John, it's been wonderful catching up with you today. And Gwen, thank you for being here and asking your great questions. And I'm looking forward to making this podcast available.
Oh, great. Yeah, Bill and Gwen, thanks so much. I really appreciate it. Bill, I've always obviously appreciate your work and, some of our exchanges here even in the last few weeks. So you've always been just really thoughtful in your approach and challenging leaders to, move beyond themselves and try to create something better for as many as possible as well. So I appreciate that.
Thank you, John. Yeah, I see the same in you. So I think that's why we connect so well.
Yeah.
And Gwen, too.
Well, and thanks for letting me and my lawn care folks tag along.
Anytime. It takes a community. Even the lawn care. See, that was their way to bring nature into the conversation, too.
Yes.